Welcome to The Future Live, hosted by Mark Salisbury, author of the new book, Socrates Digital for Learning and Problem Solving. Each 25-minute episode with Mark and his guest paints an inspiring picture of what's to come.
Welcome to The Future of Work Live. I'm Mark Salisbury, your host. Today, and he'll discuss how knowledge workers can actually compete in the new AI economy. So that's what we're going to do. And this is Dr. Tyler Schipper. Welcome to the show, Tyler.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
And here's his intro, folks. He is an associate professor of economics at St. Thomas University, or we call it the University of St. Thomas, where he inspires students through courses on macroeconomics, forecasting, and economic inequality. His perspectives on economic current events frequently appear in the media, including the Star Tribune, CNN, and other venues. Dr. Schipper's research explores the significance of data revisions in real-time forecasting and the pivotal role of incentives in reducing informality in developing economies. So let's get on to it and let's talk about our very first question. And that will be, how will AI, do you think, will affect different workers in a different way than previous technologies?
So the term we often use in economics is disruptive, that AI is one in a very, very long series of disruptive technologies. Go back to the wheel or the steam engine or automation as we knew it before AI. And I think that's what makes it interesting, is that it is different. And the biggest way that it's different is we're talking about knowledge workers, is that this is a technology that affects knowledge workers who tend to be also higher income workers. This is a technology that goes across the income spectrum in ways that previous technologies often didn't. The wheel made jobs easier for day laborers, for instance, and automation often took away those repetitive tasks, where this is a technology that's often going to show up in a college professor's job or our students' jobs in the business world or people that went and got their MBAs. And there's been a bunch of great research out there already. There's an economist at MIT, Darren Acemoglu, who has this graph in a new working paper I've just been staring at because it's color-coded, which makes it fun. But it's like exposure to AI and then the income distribution and education. So it's got this 3 dimensions to it. And the thing that you see again and again is that exposure to AI cuts across education levels and it cuts across income levels or average pay. And so that does mean that this is not going to be something that you can say, oh, I went to college, I don't have to think about how I'm going to use AI or how AI is going to affect me. Instead, it's, I went to college and I need to start thinking about how this is going to affect me, how I use it to become more effective at my job. Do I maybe need to think about, is there a different job that I want to do in the future because mine is AI-able, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, my dad grew up in West Virginia, and he was working in the coal mines before World War II. And they had this new device called the joy loader. And so previous to that time, he would actually go in and they would use little explosives and then they would, shovel the coal. And this thing would just dig it out. And so, so he's seen that over his lifetime. And I know that, a lot of people who've worked those kinds of jobs, the more blue collar, lower skilled jobs, they've been facing this for a long time. And then now here we are with knowledge workers and it's like, oh, hold it. You need to use automation too. And now it's a problem, right? Before it wasn't a problem. It was a good thing. We're getting rid of all that manual work. So I think that there's kind of a day of reckoning with all of this. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up the coal mine example, because I talk about those examples all the time in my class, that we often think about globalization, automation kind of leaving behind a class of workers. And it's often those blue collar jobs. And I always have to, when I use the term low skilled all the time too, and I remind myself, like, I can't do coal mining. I'm really bad at that. I can't do carpentry. It's not low skilled. It's a bunch of skills I don't have.
Yeah.
But we do differentiate them because often they don't have a college degree. And we think about those technologies, those disruptive technologies usually affecting those type of workers when this is a new type of technology that we have to figure out how it affects knowledge economy and the management level of economy as well.
Yeah, that's it exactly. And I'm guilty of the same thing. And then I turn around and I think about that and I go, there's a lot of things out there that people do that we would classify, right, as low skill jobs that I can't do.
And
So
we do it all the time in the econ literature. Absolutely.
yeah, so but we won't go into them for me because our show is only 25 minutes long. This would take about 5 days, the things I can't do. But how about this? There's some economists like David, author, who's, and I misspoke that because I'm trying to do more than one thing at a time, Otter, who's actually very optimistic about AI. Can you tell us a little about that?
Yeah, and we're going to connect back to the coal mining example because David Otter, so he's the other half of the Future for Work initiative at MIT with Darren Acemoglu, and he's really spent this career, like an illustrious career, documenting kind of the hollowing out of the working class in the United States through globalization and automation. So somebody like your dad that had to adjust to coal mining in West Virginia, that's who David Otter would have been studying.
Yeah.
Not exactly the thing of optimism about the future of work, yet here he is with AI and he's optimistic about it. And so these are not his words, my words. I think it's because he thinks that AI has the ability to democratize decision making. That if you think about who gets paid the most in the workforce, it's the people with knowledge that are using that knowledge and leveraging it to make decisions. And one thing that AI can do is say, it doesn't matter if you didn't graduate from college, you can use AI to gather a lot of that same knowledge. You have the same knowledge base to make a decision now, and we can democratize that decision making. And so his main argument is that people that were sufficiently categorized as lower skilled, we'll go back to that term, now can make decisions much like management could before. And that has the potential to tip the scales back in favor of those workers that maybe were replaced in previous iterations of automation.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that our little conversation here shows that things are changing, and it's actually changing our concept of work. I mean, this whole idea of low skill kind of goes away, and what do we call that, right? And so it is very interesting. And if I remember, I read a little thing in the news paper, and you and I chatted about it at one time, is that, he was saying that this might be a step into the middle class for some jobs that have been pushed down for a number of decades now.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of the way economists are thinking is that there's the uncertainty about to what extent is AI a technology that's going to substitute for labor versus to the extent that it complements labor. And his argument is more about that complementary aspect, that that even for workers that don't have a knowledge degree, for instance, they have a lot of field-specific knowledge that they can make decisions if they have the right background that maybe AI can provide. And so there's lots of even high-skilled, high-knowledge type of roles in the economy. So I think of journalism because I do a lot of those interviews about the economy, and I think about journalism and the way that this is going to show up in journalism is that in some aspects, if you think about like personal finance articles, highly derivative in many cases, there's going to be a proliferation of those articles out there, and there's going to be some substitution of people writing those articles. At the same time, we can think about venues like the New York Times, where you can format the articles, you can come up with creative titles, you can do some of the writing and editing. That's great for AI. And it opens up more time to chase down the story, have more interviews. And it's that complementarity that I think is the valuable piece of AI that can kind of deepen our jobs, our connections with our jobs, deepen our engagement in our jobs. And hopefully that's the aspect of AI that seems to win out rather than too much of this replacement, which is what drives a lot of the anxiety around AI for workers.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then one of the things too is, we think about this facing it as a society, right? And I know there's a lot of fear and intrepidation about this, just for the things that we've talked about. But what policies, right, might help shape the evolution of AI and ultimately work?
So the first policy I think is the kind of the dream policy and thinking big. If you go kind of back in time to the 2016 election, David Yang is the Democratic nominee for president, and he's talking about a plan called Universal Basic Income. Mm-hmm. And part of the selling point is that work would become less necessary in the future because of AI and machines. And people often scoffed at that. And here we are, like less than 10 years later, and we need to have more serious conversations about universal basic income and guaranteed basic income. And for people that aren't familiar, this means there's a monetary payment that gives you a basic standard of living. And right now, that's hard to imagine how we get to that politically, because it's the paying for it that's difficult. But if the gains from AI end up being large because people are that much more productive, there might be additional gains that you could actually redistribute so that people can have that baseline level of living. And the really optimistic part is maybe we just need to work less. That maybe losing some jobs isn't necessarily bad when they redistribute, and we get to that mythical 4-day work week that you've seen in the news a lot as well. And I don't think that's bad. If in a future world we all still are more engaged with our jobs and we have to show up less, that seems like a recipe for happier lives. If we're all working a little bit less, we have a basic standard of living that's guaranteed because we've instituted good policies. That's a world that I can be optimistic at. It might be a moonshot, but I think it's possible.
Well, that is interesting because the studies that I've seen and what people talk about that are in your job is that we tend to be working more, putting in more hours than we used to. And so now with AI, we could actually, it doesn't take a lot of imagination to go, well, now we can work 100-hour weeks with AI, and it'll be like we're like 10 people. But I think what you're advocating here, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, is that we can think collectively about this and we can shape our own future and actually put AI to work for us rather than us working for AI.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially in the US, I think there's a little bit of a culture shift here that this is kind of two parts, right? I don't think that saying that, oh, we should all work less when we haven't taken care of the people that are least well off to start with. It's hard for somebody that's struggling in poverty to say, oh, work less. But once you've kind of achieved, here's a minimum standard of living that we allow people to have, and now we can start having conversations about working less. That's a very different conversation. And certainly the Europeans already work a lot less than we do. And a lot of surveys would say that they're happier about that decision making. So maybe there's a culture shift in the US that needs to happen as well.
That's interesting. Yeah. And so, when I think about this, that it's thinking about this differently, but it's also kind of the way we would live would be a little different. But one of the things I want to touch, this whole thing about the environment, that we are, what we're doing doesn't seem to be quite working. And I think it's because, to boil it down into terms, that we are lowering our costs of production by basically using our environment as a large trash can, right? And so if we actually started to look at all the extra smarts that we're going to need, all the extra decisions the way down, in some ways, we're going to actually need AI if we're going to be able to move forward with a very high standard of living and take care of our planet. And so I know I'm getting off note here, but now we have you here, and I was going to see what you think from your base camp.
See, so what's funny is that you're not off note from what I had wanted to talk about, but I was trying to economize on time here, which is, so absolutely, I think that there's some optimization that AI can use to help us be more efficient and degrade the environment less. I think there's also kind of a counterpoint to this, which is we need to be careful about seeing AI's ability to just produce more and more and more and use up a lot of electricity, right? That's one of the downsides of AI. And actually putting some of those caps on how much electrical usage can also ensure that there's still a role, due to this idea of in economics of comparative advantage, there's still a role for human work because we're going to deploy AI where it's most valuable rather than just where it's a little bit more valuable than human beings. And so that could be another policy to both make sure that we're using AI where it helps us prevent environmental harm, but also making sure that we don't allow it to just say, let's produce more and more and more and more, especially when that might not make us happier. That's supposed to be the goal of all this, is how do we live happier, healthier lives, not how do we accumulate more stuff. And there's certainly a culture shift in there. And I'm not sure we'll listen to AI if it tells us to consume less, but hopefully we can use AI to be more efficient in our production systems.
One of the things that always strikes me about new emerging technologies is that they give us a tremendous advantage in being able to do good. And yet there always is, because of who we are as human beings, there's always a number of us, and within us is that we use technology to do things that are really harmful and the other people. And so I look at AI and I look at this and I go, yeah, I mean, this can be a really great way that we can improve our livelihood. We can actually improve, I think, with some personal AI, we can improve ourselves to a point that we would like ourselves better as human beings. But yet at the same time, we have something that can do great harm to other people, right? I mean, we have all these fake stories and all of these things that we can do with AI. And so I think the one thing that AI can't do is actually change the course of who we are as human beings. But I think what you're saying too is, and I'm talking too much here, is it can help us become really a better version of ourselves.
Absolutely. And I think that this is some of the points that you were touching on there is part of the reason why I think I can find some optimism about AI is that there's always the pessimistic side of me. I'm teaching an economic inequality class right now. And since the 1970s, we've seen income inequality continue to increase, largely driven by the top 1% of the income distribution. And it's been 50 years. We haven't really taken effective action to change that. And that's the pessimistic side. The optimistic side is that disruptive technologies like AI, they make the whole pie bigger. That's why they get utilized.
Yeah.
That there is more to go around. And so then it's a question of, can we make sure that everybody gets a fair slice? Or do we make sure the whole pie gets eaten by the billionaire class? And that's the worry. But we have a lot of agency in that. And that's the reason for optimism, is that we can maybe go back and say, people that have been left behind, AI gives them a chance. The David Otter argument, that we could reduce overall income inequality as long as we put some safeguards on how we share the gains from these type of disruptive technologies. And even for those people that are in the billionaire class, I think there's a good reason to do that, which is, one, you care about fellow human beings, and two, that in a future world, to have some degree of social cohesion, we need to make sure that we're taking care of the least well off. And that if you don't have that, you're not going to make your billions. And so hopefully there's an element of self-preservation in that if you want to maximize your own profits, you got to make sure that you bring enough people along with you. And that's I think my optimism here, is that I think AI can make the pie bigger and we can figure out ways to distribute it more fairly.
Yeah, and then the other nightmare that I think about sometimes when I project into the future is we go back in time, if you will. I mean, I can see a billionaire basically buying up, hundreds of thousands of acres and basically creating their own city and then bringing in people to service them. So they're kind of like some medieval kingdom, And I mean, that's the specter you can see if there isn't really kind of some thinking about this in a forward way, and how this can actually benefit all of us. Because I think most people would agree that the billionaire who owns their own kingdom would be great for that particular individual, but not so great maybe for the rest of us. So.
And the ultimate irony is that many billionaires are not happy. And so maybe there's a large failing there as well.
Okay, well, very good. Well, let's move on to you a little bit. I understand that you actually do kind of what we're doing right now, that you kind of consult on the state of the economy to a lot of companies and organizations. So you want to tell us a little bit about that aspect of what you do during the day?
Absolutely. So during the pandemic, there was a lot of engagement with the economy. People wanted to know, how's the labor market looking, and what's the Fed going to do, and where are interest rates going to go? And so I started getting requests, can you come talk about the economy? And something I've learned, certainly in my short time at St. Thomas, is if somebody's willing to pay you to come nerd out on what you love to talk about, you say yes. And so I said yes a lot. I'm known for saying yes. And so that's what I do. I get to go out and I get to talk about the markets and how they might be affecting people's businesses or industries. And those often are conversations which I enjoy. And that's the second part, which is I get great fodder to bring back to my classroom to make the economy real for my students. And that's the other part of, yes, I nerd out on it, but I also get to bring something back to St. Thomas, and I appreciate those conversations.
Oh, very good. And I think in some ways you feel a little bit like a farmer who's planting some seeds out there that people think about. Maybe that's part of this too.
Absolutely. When I give those talks, there will always be part of that talk where I challenge people to think a little bit differently about the economy, or I like to give them one little insight that's a little bit too technical, but just so they have an upper hand on somebody when they want to show off their knowledge a little bit.
Oh, very good. Well, it's been great having you on the show. So we're kind of getting to that point where we're talking about the takeaway, and I think it has something to do with how policy, that we can think about this, collectively, not only where we work, but the other things that we participate in, that we can actually shape our future to the future that we want. Am I kind of off the beam here?
Not at all. That there's nothing inevitable about the future with AI. That we have immense capacity to shape through policy what we want the future of work to look like, and it's going to take some political will. I don't want to sugarcoat that passing policy in this age of politics is extremely hard. But if we want AI to be a force for good and to provide for people like work maybe doesn't right now, we can do that through policy. It just will take a lot of good, hard, old-fashioned work.
Oh, very good. And I think that ties up our show for right now. And so I really appreciate you saying yes to our show and being on today. And so thanks a lot. And for you folks out there, thanks for watching.
You can find previously broadcast episodes of The Future Live in video and podcast format on www.marksalisbury.com. In addition, YouTube has a channel for video episodes of The Future Live. And Apple, Spotify, and Google host podcasts of The Future Live.